Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 Virtual Atlanta Journal-Constitution Decatur Book Festival, presented by Emory University. I'm Chef Deborah Van Treese, and I myself am a restaurateur and cookbook author. I'm thrilled to be introducing you to a chef who has been a pioneer and achieved many firsts on behalf of African Americans in both the music and culinary industries. But first, let me thank our sponsors. The festival's culinary conversations are presented by Whole Foods Market, and we are very grateful for their generous support of our industry and our community here in Atlanta, Georgia. It is an honor to share a little bit about Chef Smalls. While food was a part of his life since childhood, he actually studied to be an opera singer and went on to perform worldwide, racking up a Grammy and a Tony Award for his performances. When he redirected his professional aspirations to owning restaurants, he was no less successful. Chef Smalls created renowned destination dining spots such as Café Beulah, Sweet Ophelia's Shoebox Cafe, Minton's, and of course, the Cecil, New York City's first African Asian American restaurant, which was named Best New Restaurant in America by Esquire magazine. As if this wasn't enough success, Chef is also an award-winning author. His last cookbook, Between Harlem and Heaven, a collaboration with renowned chef J.J. Johnson, was honored with a James Beard Award. His recent book, Meals, Music, and Muses, Recipes from My African Kitchen, is the story of his journey and the topic of tonight's discussion. Now you see why I am such a fan and why I am so proud to introduce him to you. It is with gratitude for all he has done to open doors for African American chefs that I give you Chef Alexander Smalls, along with tonight's MC, Lia Grabowski, food editor of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. My name is Lia Grabowski. I am the associate editor with the Local Palate. We've sponsored the wonderful book talk we have today with Alexander Smalls, author of this fantastic book, Meals, Music, and Muses, which came out February of this year. Alexander, how are you doing today?
Hi, Leah. How are you? Nice to be here with you.
Great. And so the magazine I'm with, we are a food culture magazine based in Charleston, South Carolina. We cover food culture of the South, which is a great fit since your book really is tied to the Lowcountry and your roots here, which I know is such a departure from your last book, which was such a global approach to the African diaspora and how food affected the global community. What made you want to really bring this book home to where you're from?
Well, you know, it was a wonderful opportunity for me to kind of bring my two great loves together in one book, music and food, and also to pay tribute to the food that made me, the cultural expression of Southern food. Yeah.
Wonderful. And so your family is from Charleston or from the Charleston area, right?
My grandfather and father were born in Charleston, South Carolina. My grandmother was from Beaufort. When my father was a teenager, his father, my grandfather, moved the family from Charleston to Spartanburg, South Carolina. And Spartanburg, South Carolina is where I was born and grew up. But our house was peculiar because we, in my house, had low country fare. And none of my friends had the food that we were serving. So I knew that it was unique. And about 3 or 4 times a year, we would take these trips to Charleston and Beaufort and bring back bushels of crab, and we'd go shrimping, And we'd bring back, the moss that grew on the tree. And so many of the sort of low country expressions were very much a part of our household. So it tied me to that culture in a very unique way. So when I had an opportunity to first open, actually my first restaurant, I wanted to bring the food of my childhood and of my cultural expression to New York City. And that's what I did.
It was very well received, as I understand.
Still here.
And I love that in this book you refer to your recipes that you've collected as a playlist and a collection of the greatest hits from your life and the recipes that you've really collected. Are there certain recipes in particular that really formed the basis right away that you knew, okay, this has to be in the book?
Well, yes. I mean, this was an incredible opportunity to curate what I consider the definitive Southern cookbook. And again, it's my African American kitchen, so I can do what I want. And I did. And I thought a lot about dishes that not only were emblematic of my upbringing, but also had unique stories. For example, when my father and his friends would go pheasant hunting and bring home all those birds, and the picnic table in the back was lined with newspaper and a big pot of hot water and a black pot was boiling, and they cleaned those birds. And my uncle, who was a chef, would be in the kitchen, making all sorts of dishes. So I looked for recipes that really told my unique story, but also I thought mirrored the landscape of good Southern low country fare.
And you say your uncle was a chef. Did that drive you towards the food world?
Oh, absolutely. My Uncle Joe and my Aunt Laura were kind of the pillars of how my life kind of turned out. Uncle Joe was a chef in Harlem when I was born. He was also part of the Harlem Renaissance, that era, and knew many of the players, including Edna Lewis, who was a chef and dressmaker here in New York prior to coming to Charleston.
Right.
But my uncle was a chef, and my aunt was a classical pianist.
Wow.
So that's how the opera and the food sort of seeded in me at a very early age. I spent a lot of time with them as a kid. In fact, the family home was situated sort of at the point of a pyramid, and our house was at the point. My uncle was at another point and my grandfather at the other. And then there was a path that went to my grandfather's garden up to my grandpa's house and my uncle's house. So if I timed it well, I could time 3 dinners, because no one ever ate at the same time. My grandfather ate first, and then my parents, and then my uncle, because he had lived in New York, they ate late, like after 8. And so I would spend a lot of time with them in the evening on my third supper, listening to opera, because my uncle loved Renata Tebaldi, Birgit Nilsson, and Caruso, and he had these big 78s. And then, of course, he was this incredible chef who would teach me to dream in the kitchen when I cooked. So they really formed the foundation of what my world was going to be like. Yeah.
And what brought you to settle in New York as opposed to perhaps going back to South Carolina? I assume the music and your music career?
Well, I wasn't going to be the kind of opera singer I wanted to be in South Carolina. I mean, I learned that at an early age. So my education, when I graduated from high school, I had been in a pre-college classical program at the prestigious Converse College in Spartanburg, and when I was in high school. And president, I remember Hardin, who at that time was the president of Wofford College, really went out of his way to recruit me to Wofford. And what made it ideal is I could continue my classical studies at Converse. So those first 2 years I was there, but I realized the limitations of not being in a conservatory. And so the North Carolina School of Performing Arts kind of called me, and I went there and finished my first degree. And it was really eye-opening with respect to my music education. I got accepted to the prestigious Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia and studied there until the Houston Grand Opera came along. The production of Porgy and Bess that they were touring around the country. After the performance in Philadelphia, I went backstage because my old friend Clamor Dale was Bess, and she invited me to the cast party, introduced me as a young singer at Curtis. They asked me to audition. They gave me a lead role, and there I went off to sow my oats in the world with the Houston Grand Opera. We traveled for a time. I think that, well, first they were appearing on Broadway, so I had to move to New York. And then I took off around the world with them to all European capitals. And that's how I ended up transitioning and living in New York these last 40-something years.
So, of course, you know, this illustrious opera career, what brought you back into the food realm? Was it that you felt there was something missing in the food scene in New York that you wanted to bring there, this low country flavor?
I wish it was that simple, but essentially I had hit the glass ceiling in classical music and in opera. It was very difficult for African-American male singers to really break through. I had been trying for years. So I was living in Paris, studying at the Paris Opera House, and having a more of a recital concert career in Europe than opera. And my good friend Kathleen Battle arranged for me to have another audition at the Met, my third. So I flew in from Paris, and I auditioned. Usually you sing an aria and you start another one, and then they tell you your fate. I sang 2 arias. I started the third, and at that point I was represented by Cami artists. Cami, one of the most prestigious classical agencies, management companies in the country. And they offered me chorus and a production where I'd already won a Grammy and a Tony. And I was so devastated and disappointed. I left there, and the next day had decided I was opening my first restaurant.
Wow.
So without looking back, in 18 months, I was building my restaurant. And now 5 restaurants later and 3 books, I have a music career. I have a food career with a musical past.
No, and this book is such an interesting fusion of the two,
Yes.
and the way that it, brings them together, and the way you've classified dishes based on or connected them to different styles of music. How did you go about sort of organizing that, and which came first? Was it, that you collected the dishes and then said, okay, this works with this style, or was it more collaborative back and forth?
No, actually, you're right. I mean, I first put together my African-American kitchen because the playlist was more about the soundtrack of my life. And so at various stages, for example, the first chapter of jazz. And jazz for me is especially improvisational jazz, bebop. It kind of represents creativity. Wynton Marsalis, who wrote the introduction to my first book, Grace the Table, used to say I cooked like a jazz musician. First, I never cooked the same thing twice. Secondly, I'm inspired by the mood, the music, the event, and what's in the cupboard. And so if you came to my house and you had something that I made and you asked me to do that again, chances are I probably don't remember, or I could never reproduce that again, because this is why I'm a chef who has chefs, because when you come to my restaurants, you want the same thing you had. That's something I won't give you. So in this whole concept of food and playlist, I wanted to show the influence and the periods of music that really shaped my coming of into my own, my coming of age, kind of like a musical biography of how my life took shape and form.
Do you think that are any dishes that like represent you the most, or like something that you cook that you feel is just like you on a plate?
Well, you know what's interesting, and there's so many great recipes. I mean, fun dishes, classics that I've done a riff on. But the curious thing also is the dishes that have been sort of translated in all of the 3 cookbooks. There's, for example, without apology, one of my favorite comfort meals is hot dogs. I love hot dogs. So in every cookbook, I have a hot dog recipe.
Oh, cool.
So there are comfort traits like that. And there's also a version of a fried fowl, whether it's chicken or guinea hen or quail. So dishes like that. And they also are such a part of the Southern culinary scene.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, in that sense, there are some wonderful dishes like that, and of course, the shrimp and grits, smothered shrimp and crab meat gravy over grits. This is a dish my father taught me. My father didn't really cook at home except for this dish on special occasions. It would either be holidays for breakfast or certain Sundays. We would have his smothered shrimp and crab meat gravy over grits. Just tremendous.
I mean,
Try it.
such a great, comfort food for sure. So your book, it came out in February, right before all of this craziness started, before everything closed down. Do you think that's impacted the way people have kind of read it, interacted with it, maybe connected to it, or, do you feel that it has sort of changed the way your book has been consumed?
Well, I think that I think it's been really good in the sense that people are turning to cooking during this period. They're at home. They're ordering out less, and certainly not going to restaurants. And I had just started my book tour. I did an incredible kickoff in Washington, D.C. at the Swiss Embassy. We did a wonderful event for Black-owned restaurants in the city, many of them who had been there for decades. And we had a wonderful sort of, sip and eat night, which was really lovely. And I was off to a good start. The book was well received. And then COVID happened and there was no more book tour.
Right.
But what came from all of that was exactly what we're doing now. The Zooms, the podcasts, the radio shows, the Instagram lives. I mean, I could start my day in Arizona, in Phoenix, end up in Denver, then Portland, and then in Atlanta. And so I've been doing this, and the book has gotten great press, and people really want to talk about food. And they want to talk about recipes and preparation. I think everybody wants to feel good. That's what food does for me.
Yeah, we all need a little feel good right now. And how has all of this, this quarantine and lockdown, all of this, how has it affected you personally? From your day to day, are you holed up in your home?
Well, I am, and it's challenged a number of things. I had a new project that I was working on, negotiating a new restaurant concept for myself that I was going to open in New York and London, and that had to be put on hold. Thankfully, we are still entertaining doing it, but that I mean, in this climate, it made sense to put that on hold. So I got more into my writing. I am writing my first children's book, which I'm very excited about. Yeah, and so I'm busy with that. I managed to shoot a feature for Food and Wine magazine that will come out in the October issue. So that's good news. And I went back in the recording studio for the first time in 30 some years and just finished a new recording that I plan to release in February. So I've been a little busy.
Yeah, certainly got a lot of projects going on. I mean, a lot more productive than I think a lot of people's quarantine has been. Can you tell us more about the children's book? What's the premise, or is it food, music, any of that linked in there?
Well, what it is, it's Little Alexander. It really takes a page from my childhood and my interest in food and cooking. It's not a recipe book, but it's a storybook. And, hopefully the story will lift young people's self-esteem, give them confidence, encourage them to venture into the kitchen and be curious, and create recipes that make them feel good about themselves, and also help the family to be closer. So I'm hoping it is the first of many of little Alexander's escapades around the globe, spreading his message.
Wonderful message. And speaking of, global influences, I know you said you traveled a lot while you were, on opera tours and things.
Yeah.
Did those European and, different global influences make their way into this book at all? Is that something that, has influenced your cooking at your restaurants?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that a sort of an extraordinary awareness and awakening for me, because essentially America, we've always been sort of in the international global conversation of cuisine. Our food has always been last, or it has not gotten the respect or reverence of European food, for example. And so much of the influences in my first restaurant, Café Beulah, which was the first African-American fine dining restaurant specializing in low country cuisine in New York. And what I understood traveling the world as an opera singer was that gourmet food, fine dining food, was once mama's food. It was home cooking. And it had been dressed up, elevated, and seen through the lens of an artful creation, decorated, if you will, and sort of handcrafted, artistically presented on a plate. And then, of course, the taste and essence of that food, rose to the occasion of its presentation. And so that was my impetus, because I understood that taking the wonderful cuisine of the Low Country, of the Southern kitchen, and bringing it into that kind of awareness and presentation was my goal. And that's what I did. So there's the influence.
Wonderful. And I know you mentioned before you're a chef who has chefs. So what is your process for kind of menu creation or starting these restaurants? Do you just sort of, make the dishes and someone's kind of writing down what you're doing, or how do you go about crafting these menus?
Well, what I've learned over the years is, and actually so much of that is influenced by my aunt and uncle, creating a flavor profile, creating a culinary vocabulary. So you and your chef de cuisine or your assistants, you have a language to articulate about the food that you are creating. One of the best examples is when I decided to do my last restaurant, the Cecil, which was what I created, what I called Afro-Asian American cooking. Essentially, I understood after I did my first 3 restaurants, which I called Southern Revival Cooking, based on Low Country cooking, that our story was bigger than the Low Country, than the South. And it had a lineage and a legacy in Africa and in countries that were affected by the influence of enslaved people. So I set out on an odyssey of many, many years studying the foods of the African diaspora, essentially how through slavery, Africa changed the global culinary conversation. And I started to study, collect, and assemble a language, a flavor profile that mirrored how this food traveled throughout the world on 5 continents, which gave me an ingredient base, but also the techniques and the way enslaved African people cooked food in Brazil, cooked food in China, because, as quiet as it's kept, China had a very large African slave community since the 1500s, the Song Dynasty. So, and then you had the Asian Chinese influence in Jamaica, which created another flavor profile. So I was able to take a completely clean canvas and really put together a flavor formula, which is how I go about setting out the principles of cooking in my kitchens.
And can you give us some examples of those flavors and those techniques that you found from different areas?
Well, I mean, probably one of the biggest techniques of African cooking is smothering and stews and high flame cooking. Salt as a preservative, so salted meats, chilies and peppers and things of that nature, and watching that translate in with different flavor profiles from West Africa to the Caribbean to South America. It really starts to take on an expansive narrative. But let's take gumbo and look at gullah, shrimp and okra, or fish and okra stew. And then you can do that same translation in Brazil, and you come up with various sort of the basic principles, but various flavor infusions that mirror the culture. Oxtails, for example, in the South versus oxtails in Brazil, feijoada, oxtails with black beans. So, I mean, we're all speaking, the same language. It's in the presentation and the marrying of spices and culinary techniques that give it its specialness.
Just using the ingredients at each person's disposal. Gotcha.
Absolutely.
And that's all sort of laid out in your previous book, correct? From Harlem to Heaven?
Yes. I mean, that book really took the African diaspora on a global adventure. you know, as far ranging again as China and South America, Mexico, the Caribbean, and Europe, as well as the African American palate. So, I mean, that's a very adventurous cookbook. You know, we're very proud of that book. That was the book that won the James Beard Award a couple of years ago. And, you know, when you do something like that, you run the risk of someone really writing it off as newfangled or fusion or, you know, but, you know, there was so much scholarship and history that went into the intersections of a people and its cultural imprint, you know, on the global landscape. So it's a fun read. It's a lot more challenging to cook from that book. I created Meals, Music, and Muses as I wanted the recipes to be simple and comfortable. And there's a lot of room for you to also make them your own, you know, be a little more creative, add a little more extra, you know, chilies or make the roux thinner rather than heavier. But the idea is to aim for that flavor profile. I always tell people, make a dish the way it's written first, and then you claim it. Then you play around with it.
You gotta know the rules before you break them.
Yeah.
And I will say the recipes in this book are very accessible. When I was covering it for the magazine, I was looking through and there were some that I absolutely bookmarked as I need to make this, and they are.
Well, also the ingredients are easy to, like, I mean, Between Harlem and Heaven, you know, you got to really shop, you know. And I wanted you to be able to take this book home, and so many of those ingredients might even be in your larder, you know, or in your refrigerator already, and just get busy. As simple as the Carolina coleslaw with a roasted corn. That roasted corn just adds another dimension of flavor and texture.
Right, and things you wouldn't necessarily think of, but are such simple additions that really make a huge difference in the end product.
Yes, this is just.
Do you have a favorite from the book, like one you love to recommend? I know that's like picking a favorite child.
I know. Well, other than my hot dogs, right? Well, you know, I like, again, I go back to those dishes that are such a big part of my childhood. And, you know, that's the catfish plate, the buttermilk mac and cheese. In my other books, I have a mac and cheese, but this is the first one with buttermilk, for example. And that reminds me of my Uncle Joe, who was the chef. He any opportunity to use buttermilk to make mac and cheese or any kind of custard.
Wow.
And of course, the lemon pie. It's one of the first pies I ever made. It's truly my favorite. I would make one for the family and one for me. But they're all my kids.
Pick. But it has, I mean, it's a beautiful book with beautiful imagery. And I know you've mentioned before, you've really taken to Instagram during this quarantine and really kind of found your voice on social media and enjoyed kind of cooking and sharing what you're making. Has there been anything really fun that you've made over this?
You know, I have. I mean, interestingly enough, because I am a chef who I don't really get to plate your dinner when you come to a restaurant of mine, because I'm out front meeting and greeting you, making sure you're comfortable. So what I've had so much fun doing is plating, something I don't get to do, being that creative process of putting food on a plate, on a beautiful plate with its arms stretched out. Give me the food. And so that's been really fun. I've been doing a lot of that on my Instagram. And I also write prose, a lot of it, every day. So I've also been sharing some of that too. It's kind of taken the place of all those dinner parties I normally would be having. But since I won't let anybody in my house,
Hard to be social during these
Yeah,
times.
so I'm social on Instagram. Just come and pull up a chair and look at the food and read the prose, you
Like
know.
dinner party.
Yeah, you know, go out and get the book and then post what you made and tag me. That's been a lot of fun.
That is great. And I do have one question that's come up from someone that, by the way, anyone that's watching, later on we're going to have a full Q&A, and you can add your questions to the Ask a Question feature, and we'll grab some and read them. But this one's just so fun, I have to share. It was, what do you like, or what did or do you like to eat before you perform an opera, and what do you like to have after?
Well, after is really the moment. I mean, before, my stomach is like nervous. I try to eat early because I don't, you know, I get butterflies. Well, I did get butterflies. It's been so long since I did a public performance, unless you count sort of the indulgences of dinner parties here at home, where we end up at the piano and we're singing, sipping bourbon, and, you know, falling all over the place. But it's not about what I do before. It's the appetite is at its best after a performance. As a young opera singer, I had the opportunity to spend some generous time with Luciano Pavarotti, and he was an inspiration for me. And there were a couple of occasions where we even had the opportunity to cook together. But Luciano was an extraordinary chef in his own right. And he also loved to go to very expensive restaurants, and I was able to tag along sometimes. And he would order for everybody, especially after one of his performances at the Met or Carnegie Hall. And oh my, the food was just an orgy of things. But I will tell you, one of his favorite dishes, which I fell in love with, was strawberry ice cream with balsamic vinegar glaze. Oh my God. It's like you've died and gone to heaven.
I love that. That sounds phenomenal. What an indulgent, you know, fun way to end an evening.
Yeah.
And on the note of opera, tell me about that new album you're recorded for release next February. What brought that about? Just, you know, wanting to get back, you know, dip the toe back into the music scene?
Well, you know, it had been brewing with me for some time. I was fortunate to meet a young, very talented producer who understood, you know, my desire for that feeling of unfinished business, if you will. And he sensed that there might be another act, music act, shall we say, in my career. So I teamed up with that young producer, Ulysses Owens Jr., and the extraordinarily talented veteran of music and producing, Robert Satan. And they made this a dream adventure for me. I've been concerned for many years about the African American songbook and music literature that was endangered, I felt. What comes to mind is the Negro spiritual, probably some of the most misunderstood music on the planet. You know, this music was born out of a need for enslaved people to express their music, their emotions, their ritualistic side, if you will. And they were barred from their African chants and the African music, which was akin to who they were. They were not allowed to perform that music. The only thing they could do was religious anything. So those very, very smart and clever folks took religious hymns, took spiritual verses, took African melodies, and created the spirituals. And it was a way, it had really nothing to do with religion as much as it had to do with being able to communicate through their normal ritualist music and dancing and drums that they were forbidden to do. It was also music they used to talk about what was going on in the village, what was happening with the Underground Railroad and various other informations that they needed to communicate. So when slavery was over, all that music went to the church. And so I teamed up with these extraordinary jazz musicians to put the music in a new context. So I put it into sort of a jazz context with a lyrical vocal instrument, mine. And that's what we created.
Wow, that is incredible.
I'm looking forward to sharing it.
All right, and I think we're about to head into the Q&A, but before we do, I just want to say, so do you have any other projects on the horizon that you want to share? I know we have covered quite a few of them, from the book to the album. Is there anything else?
Well, there's always something going on, but I think I'm going to hold on to the others because I mean, there's so many interesting opportunities that I'm discovering and exploring, and I'm having a good time with it. So when it's time, I'll let you know.
Wonderful. All right, we got a couple of questions coming in. Someone says they can't wait to try some of your recipes. And what is the last dish or meal that you cooked for yourself?
Isn't that funny? Because in the green room, you and I were just talking about this vegetarian pepper pot stew that I concocted and posted on my Instagram page about an hour and a half ago. I mean, I'm always cooking. I have in my kitchen, I have a restaurant stove in my New York apartment and 3 refrigerators.
Oh my God.
Exactly. So, I mean, I'm just cooking and then it goes in the freezer and then sometimes it comes out and gets rearranged in something else. But yeah, that was the last dish I made.
All right. Let's see. You've been defining Black foodways in restaurants for decades amid many seismic shifts and economic downturns. In this moment of industry transformation, do you have any thoughts about where our foodways will go next?
Where the African-American foodways will go next?
Sure.
Well, I mean,
you started by saying Black foodways, so I'm assuming that's what they meant.
Yes. Well, about 2 weeks ago, I wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post about Black chefs coming into their own, and some who dared to give themselves permission to cook out of the box. Once they learned the classical cookings of Europe, they then took those techniques and understanding of food and turned it on their native cuisine, their African American cuisine, and they've been doing, extraordinary things. I mean, folks like Mashama Bailey and J.J. Johnson, who was a mentee of mine here in New York. You have a number of chefs that are really stepping out and doing their food with pride and raising the consciousness and expanding the narrative of what an African-American chef is in a kitchen. I think that the biggest hurdle is the same hurdle that's always been there. I learned early on, after trying to break the glass ceiling in opera, that in order to advance in any cause, you have to own not only a seat at the table, but you really should own the table. And I started my restaurant career because I owned the restaurant. I mean, otherwise, it would have been very difficult for me to do what I wanted to do, because who was I? I was just an opera singer who thinks he can cook, but that was okay when you own it yourself. And if you create something and everyone loves it, then everybody forgets that you haven't staged in famous kitchens all from pillar to post and all over the world. So I think that it's going to be challenging because the same thing that's always been challenging, financing. I couldn't get any institution to take any interest in me. I couldn't get financing. Who was I? And it was my friends and family that came to my aid and helped me get that first restaurant open. Interestingly enough, having had 5 restaurants, the last 2, I was fortunate enough to have gone into business with Richard Parsons, who was the chairman of Time Warner, president and CEO rather of Time Warner, and was the chairman of Citibank. So I didn't have to worry about the money for the first time, which really felt good. But again, if one can overcome those financial obstacles, the talent is there and the restaurant community will come back. I mean, as soon as you can make people feel comfortable that the corona exposure is not a death sentence, and that it couldn't be treated, and you can still have the life that you become accustomed to, everything will come back.
Absolutely. How have your restaurants adapted during COVID, and what do you see as the future for the independent restaurant?
Well, the interesting thing about my restaurants is in 2017, I walked away from my restaurants. So I haven't had a restaurant in 3. And interestingly enough, while I have missed it, I was really happy that I didn't have to add that to my plate. And not the business part of it as much as my employees are like family. I mean, and I think that's the hardest part for most business people, when you have to let your employees go. A lot of your employees see you as, the godfather, and somehow or another you're going to figure out how they're going to be okay. I mean, that's what a boss does, certainly in theory. And it's devastated me. I mean, I've called up all of my old employees. They haven't been my employees since 2017. But I called to see how they were doing because, my heart is there.
Of course. Would you consider making your way back to the South and opening a restaurant in the Lowcountry?
I would consider the right opportunity at the drop of a hat. Is there a caller who wants me to do that?
You have an opportunity.
You say what, caller? King Street?
Are there any particular spices that are exciting you at the moment? Anything you're jazzed about?
I like bold aromatic spices. I like flavor. I like chilies. I like ginger. I like cumin. I like 5-spice. I like cinnamon. I like spices that leap, from the plate. I love that.
All right, let's see. How can we foster entrepreneurship in Black communities so more creative businesses can open and succeed?
Well, it really does come down to creating economic platforms for Black businesses. You've got to have funds, an engine that really is dedicated to not only making sure that the financial resources are there, but also the support, the business resources. I mean, in this article that I wrote for the Washington Post, I talk about how, you're talking about a culture, an African-American culture, that essentially, for the better part of the time post-slavery, they were kept out of the business and financial conversation. It was uh, basically a government conspiracy that didn't allow Blacks, people of color, Black and brown people, to participate. So, you know, they don't have the years of entrepreneurship or the families, the generations of business people that are part of their reality and reach. So, you know, you have to create economic, you know, and educational opportunities to make sure they don't fail. There's a formula to all of this. And, you know, once you know the formula, you can succeed.
Absolutely. Let's see. We know your comfort food is hot dogs. What do you look for in a perfect hot dog? It's quite the transition.
Wasn't it? I like my hot dogs tight. So you bite in them and they explode. I like to cook my dogs. First, I like to plump them up. So sometimes I'll boil them in a little water or steam them so they really get, and then I throw them on a hot grill to tighten the skin. Yeah, and that's how I like my Frankfurter.
What are your favorite toppings on a hot dog?
Toppings, oh well, I mean Southern, so I want chili and coleslaw. You know. Now where I veer off of the Southern tip is that I want mayonnaise instead of mustard, and I want pickle relish.
Kind of hot dog going on.
Hey, maybe it's a Belgium hot dog, but I mean, I like my mayo and I like my pickle relish.
Fair. Who is an up-and-coming chef that you think we should be paying attention to?
Oh my, well, you know, this call is trying to get me in trouble. It's probably one of my chefs. I think there is a number of them, you know, and if you want to inbox me on social media, I'd be happy.
In the right direction.
I'm not going to get in trouble.
I understand. Don't want to leave anyone out.
Oh my.
All right. I think, let's see, is that it for questions? Let me make sure I didn't miss any here. All right. That is our last question at this moment. Let me see if anyone else has a question, go ahead and throw it in the Ask Questions feature for Alexander to answer. And I'm just gonna give that a second, make sure no one else has any final thoughts. Do you have anything else you want to share with us? Any final words of wisdom? Obviously, everyone should definitely go pick up the book.
Right. Yes. And the other two as well. Why not?
Yes, absolutely.
Just go wild.
You can be inspired and then go cook some great food.
Cook some great food. You know, look, cooking is such a joy. And if you will allow yourself to get comfortable in your kitchen and bring to life with some fresh produce, some fresh seafood, or, you know, chicken, this book can walk you through how to make some delicious dishes and create a special time for yourself. And the last thing I'll say is to that person in the South who thinks I should come home and do a restaurant. All right, let me hear what you got.
Looking for opportunities. Oh, we did have one question pop in. Where does barbecue fit, and what's your go-to joint? So, what's your barbecue?
Oh my! In what part of the world?
Ooh.
You know. I mean, obviously, if I'm in Charleston, you know, I'm going over to Rodney Scott's. Mm-hmm. Wow. And I know so many of those guys too.
Yeah.
So
we don't want to get you in trouble.
I'm gonna pass on that. But I like it. I like barbecue.
What's your favorite bourbon? Is that one we can?
Oh my goodness. Wow. I have almost too many to count. But I have been publicly cited for years now talking about my love for Woodford. In fact, Woodford Reserve. In fact, on the Today Show, oh God, many, many years ago, like 2000, the year 2000, I had a restaurant in Grand Central Station called the Shoebox Cafe, which was built around the old shoebox lunch that Southern Black folks would pack when they journeyed, because they weren't allowed, in most cases, to stop and eat in restaurants that were for whites only. So they would pack a shoebox. And as a young kid, on one of my first trips on a train, I experienced the shoebox lunch that my grandparents made. So when I was there at the Shoebox Cafe, I did the Today Show, and I do this bourbon praline ham. That's in my first book, I'm sure. But Brian Gumble said to me, "What kind of bourbon do you use?" And I said, "Well," and I just discovered Woodford in New Orleans. So I said, "Woodford, of course." So they tracked me down and sent me a case and some party hats.
How fun.
So I'd already put that out there previously. So yes, I'll say Woodford.
Woodford, on the record. And
maybe I'll send some more.
yeah, there you go. I'll find us again. And I feel like you should share your cocktail that you were telling me about earlier before this started.
Yes, and it's time to have it.
Yes.
I was saying that I start my day with Earl Grey tea because I love bergamot, and then I break for a few hours with just water, and then I start drinking iced tea. And then about 8 o'clock, the iced tea gets somehow or another, some good old bourbon falls into my iced tea. And so because it fell into my iced tea, then I have to put a little shot of ginger syrup and some lime. And that's that evening sip.
And great, refreshing sounding little cocktail to end the evening. And that'll be how we also end our chat. So I just want to say thank you for taking the time to kind of chat with me here. And thank you to our wonderful audience. And do you have any words of wisdom you want to leave us on?
Oh, wow.
Yes. Not put you on the spot or anything.
Everyone go and make an iced tea and bourbon. And if you can find some ginger, throw some of that in there and a slice of lime, and have a good night.
And post a picture and tag Alexander on Instagram.
By all means.
Small 777. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Been a pleasure.
Been great.